Anyway, we're going to be in John chapter 7 today, and for quite some time now, we're going to be in John. The story has switched out of Matthew and Mark. We're going to be in a long section of John that starts in chapter 7 here, goes all the way through to half of chapter 10. So we've got 7, 8, 9, and half of 10. So if you want to read ahead for the next few weeks, few months, that's where we're going to be for the next little while. And just so you a reminder, we haven't been in John in a while. John writes a lot about fewer things. And he doesn't do a lot of like little stories like Matthew and Mark and Luke do. John's stories are longer, and they're usually anchored around festivals, the big events in the life of Jesus and the ministry of Jesus. And now you're going to see here today, we're at a festival scene, and he's going to write quite a bit about what happens in and around this festival. So John chapter 7, Jesus says, Jesus and the guys, they've just returned from Caesarea Philippi back to Galilee. Remember we did not too long ago 3 weeks on the whole argument about who's the greatest that they had on the way back to Galilee from Caesarea Philippi. And now we're going to pick up where John left off. So John left off quite a bit earlier in the story. You can see in John chapter 6, if you flip back a chapter, the feeding of the 5,000 is there. And that's the last thing that John wrote about, was that, the feeding of the 5,000, which leads into a big sermon by Jesus back in Capernaum and several days of discussion about Jesus being the bread of life. We might have remembered that. We went through that for quite extensively. It took several weeks to get through that. This whole thing there, again, sparking opposition from the Pharisees and scribes and the leaders. And that's not going to change in John chapter 7, 8, 9, and 10 either. That whole scene is going to be, have to do with Jesus' interaction again with the leaders in Jerusalem. And that whole end of John chapter 6, that whole bread of life speech, I don't know if you remember that, where Jesus is talking, he's the new Moses, he's going to lead the new Exodus, he's the new bread from heaven, not bread that your ancestors ate in the wilderness and died, but bread from heaven that you eat and you'll live forever. And he gives that whole speech, and then you know how it ends? You can see, here let me go back up a little bit. Look at John 6:35. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. 51, I am the living bread that came down from heaven, and if anyone eats this bread, he'll live forever. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. Look at verse 57. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so whoever feeds on me, he will also live because of me. And this is the bread that came down from heaven, not like the bread the fathers ate and died. Whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. And Jesus said these things in the synagogue as he taught in Capernaum. It's a pretty sad scene, really. After all that Jesus has done, all the signs, all the miracles, all the diseases healed and the demons driven out, all this great news about being the bread of life that will make them live forever. What's the response of the people in Capernaum, his hometown, to this whole thing? Grumbling, and disputing, and arguing. And it says in verse 66 of chapter 6, after this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. They liked the miracles, but they didn't like the message. And they liked the healing and the driving away the demons, but they didn't like the call to leave behind the things of this world and take up their cross and follow him. They loved his works, but were offended by his words. Now, is the world any different today when it comes to this? People are fine with a Jesus who heals people and sets them free from their demons, aren't they? But the Jesus who says, I am the only way to the Father, the Jesus who says no one is good enough, the Jesus who says judgment is coming and I'm the only one who can save you from it? If you walk down the main drag in the Bend this summer with a sign that says something like, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can know God except through him, going to be very popular? How about if you were to walk down Dundas Street in London with a sign that says, Jesus is God, not Allah? That might provoke a few conversations. The truth of God and his only Son is not always warmly embraced in this world. Remember what Jesus told Nicodemus when he was in Jerusalem? This is John 3:19. The light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. That's the story, and that's the story in this today, and that's the story here in our story in John chapter 7. The time is short. The rejection and the opposition are increasing. And this is what prompted, remember, Jesus to start focusing more on the 12. And as his trips away in Capernaum and to Tyre and the Decapolis and Caesarea Philippi. That's why he's taken them there, wants to concentrate on them. That's where we had Peter's declaration that he is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And that's where Jesus said he's going to build his church. And this is where they saw the transfiguration and then had the discussion about who's the greatest on the way back. And then we'll pick up the story in John 7, verse 1. After this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He would not go about in Judea. Why? Verse 1, because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Okay, this isn't news. This has been going on for a while. Jews, just that word Jews. You might have a footnote in your Bible that says Judeans. So this is the idea is this is not the Jewish people in general or in a general sense. This is a reference to the leadership of the Jewish people in Judea and Jerusalem. That's how John refers to them, the Jews, the Judeans, as opposed to the Galileans. So the ones who follow the tradition of the elders, the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin, the chief priests and the temple guards and all of the powers that be, that's the Jews, the Judeans. And these are the ones who've decided that Jesus must be silent and silenced. And Judea and Jerusalem is their headquarters. The Judeans, the powers that be, the government, they want him dead. They've wanted him dead for a while. Back in the early days, actually, when the scribes and the Pharisees were sent to investigate him in Galilee. I don't know if you remember that, but Jesus heals a man on the Sabbath, right in the synagogue, contrary to their man-made rules, contrary to the traditions of the elders. It says in Mark 3, the Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. That was like 2 years ago before this. That was in Capernaum. And then Jesus basically does the same thing in Jerusalem not too long after, at the pool of Bethesda. He heals a man on the Sabbath, this time calling God his Father and pouring a little gas on the fire. And John 5:18 says, this is why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him. Because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So back to John 7, verse 1. After this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He would not go about in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Well, you might be thinking, wait a second, Dan. What about what we've been talking about the last few weeks? Matthew 16:21. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and on the third day be raised. What gives? Is that actually the plan? Jesus going to die? Why? Well, why doesn't he want to go then? Yes, well, that is what's going to happen and where it's going to happen. But the when is going to happen is not yet. It's not time for that yet. So Jesus is back in Galilee after his trips up north and over to the Decapolis, and he doesn't want to go down to Judea. He doesn't want to go further south because that's where his enemies are headquartered, and they're trying to get him killed, but that can't happen yet. That has to happen at the Passover feast, which is still 6 months away. So verse 2, there's another feast at hand. Now the feasts of Booths was at hand, or we might say the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot. It's one of the big three. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and then the Feast of Booths are the big three. 3 times a year, where every Jewish man has got to go to Jerusalem. Deuteronomy 16:16 says, 3 times a year all your males shall appear before the Lord your God at the place that he will choose, Jerusalem, at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, at the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Booths. So, Jesus has a dilemma, I guess as much as Jesus can have a dilemma. God says attendance at the Feast of Booths is mandatory for all Jewish men. Is Jesus a Jewish man? Yeah. So does Jesus want to obey his Father? Of course. Jesus must obey his Father's law. So he has to go to the feast. But he doesn't want to go to Judea. So is Jesus stressed out about this? No, he's not stressed out about this. He knows what he's doing, and he knows how to do it. How's this going to all shake out? What's Jesus going to do? Well, let's keep going and find out. So it's fall. It's feast season. 3 fall feasts there are. You probably know them. The Feast of Trumpets. That would have been in the end of September. Then Yom Kippur would have been a couple of weeks after that. And then a couple of weeks after that, after the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, is the Feast of Booths, Tabernacles. It's the final feast of the year, the third and final of the big 3. It's a big deal. Verse 3, so his brothers said to him, brothers, footnote you might have in your Bible there, brothers and sisters. Question, is Jesus talking about his literal brothers and sisters here? Or is he referring to his spiritual family, his disciples? Jesus has a real family, right? Mark 6 says, he went away from there and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished, saying, where did this man get these things? What is this wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? We're going to get similar things here in John in a minute here. But then he say this, is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. So here in our story, who's John talking about here in verse 3 when he says his brothers? Is it them? It seems so, because have a look at verse 5. It says, for not even his brothers believed in him. So it seems to me that can't be the disciples that John's mentioning here, because they believe in him. This must be his earthly family. This makes sense for the story. Anyway, so it's time for the Feast of Booths. It's time to go to Jerusalem. Verse 3, so his brothers said to him, leave here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works you are doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. Okay. What's the tone behind what his brothers are saying to him here? Why are they saying these things to their big brother? Is it because they're convinced that he is who he says he is? The Son of God, the Messiah. So they want everyone in Judea to know that too. No, apparently not, because again, verse 5, for not even his brothers believed in him. Remember when Jesus first steps into the public eye, first begins to teach publicly? Mark 3:21. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying he is out of his mind. And they thought he was crazy. And it seems they haven't really changed their minds yet. So here they are giving this advice to their brother Jesus because they don't believe him. So what do they say? Hey, Jesus, Feast of Booths time. It's time to go to Jerusalem. And that's great because it's about time you get out there where the main scene is. It's about time you leave the boonies here and get to where all the action is. You got disciples, right? You got disciples there. They need to see what you can do too. Stop hiding up here in Galilee and get to Jerusalem and prove yourself there. If you're really the Messiah, then go show yourself to the world. Go convince the Judeans. Go prove to them. Go prove to the bigwigs. Go get the Sanhedrin on your side is the idea. That's the kind of tone. A bit of a taunt, I think. A bit of a dare. Trying to bait him into action. Bait him into failure. That's what they think is going to happen. And is Jesus going to take the bait? Be like, oh yeah, I'll show you guys. Start calling down fire from heaven and stuff? Flies to Jerusalem and smites them all? No. That's not what Jesus is going to do. Satan can't provoke Jesus, and neither can his unbelieving brothers. So how do they sound? What do they sound like, by the way? Who do they sound like when they are talking like this? This kind of egging Jesus on to prove himself. Kind of sounds like the Pharisees, don't they? Anyway, what does Jesus say to his unbelieving brothers who are poking him? Verse 6, Jesus said to them, "My time has not yet come, but your time is always here." Okay, sounds a bit cryptic, but it's actually pretty straightforward, I think. Jesus is like, it's not time for me to go to Jerusalem yet, but you guys can go anytime. Why? Why is it okay for them to go whenever, but Jesus can't? Verse 7, "The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it that its works are evil." You guys can go whenever you want because it's not you that they're trying to kill. Nobody's after you guys, they're after me. I'm the hated one, not you. He says the world cannot hate you. Why? Because they're part of the world. They don't believe him. They're on the world's side. John 1, it says, "The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him." And that describes his own family. They're on the world's side. So the world doesn't hate them. The world hates Jesus. Jesus even tells them why the world hates him. Verse 7, "The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it that its works are evil." The word world there is interesting. It's cosmos in the Greek. It's not so much the planet that's in view there. Not like the ground and the air. That's not what the world means there. More like the world order, the world system. The totality of human existence. Again, in John 1:10, "He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him." That's the idea. It's not talking about the planet, but rather the creatures that live together on this planet. Jesus says the world hates him because he's telling the world the truth. And what is the truth? We already heard him tell Nicodemus. "And this is the judgment, that light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light because their works are evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed." What's Jesus' message been to the ones who run this world consistently from the beginning? You can read it in Mark 7. "Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites. As it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. You leave the commandment of God and hold to the tradition of men, thus making void the word of God by your tradition that you've handed down, and many such things you do." John 5, "The very works that I'm doing bear witness about me that the Father has sent me, and you do not have his word abiding in you, for you do not believe the one whom he sent." Anyway, back to the story. His brothers are kind of mocking him and daring him to go and perform in Judea to prove himself to the world. Verse 6, "My time has not yet come, but your time is always here. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it that its works are evil. You go up to the feast. I'm not going up to this feast, for my time has not yet fully come." After saying this, he remained in Galilee. Now, you might have a footnote in there again. I am not. It could be translated. A lot of manuscripts have "not yet going up." Not yet going up to the... You guys go ahead without me. I'm not going yet. Could be the idea. Makes sense, actually. Going up, just a little side note, that's elevation, right? Jerusalem is up on a mountain. So from the lowlands to Jerusalem, it's always up, no matter which direction of the compass you're approaching from. And Jesus is like, you guys just go ahead without me. I'm not going yet. It's not the right time for me to go yet. I'm staying here. Well, what happens next? Verse 10. "But after his brothers had gone up to the feast, then he also went up, not publicly, but in private." So apparently, of course, Jesus is going to go to the Feast of Booths. He's just not going with his family. John says in verse 10, "not publicly, but in private." Does this mean that Jesus has some kind of like disguise on or something? Or he's like a ninja sneaking around? It just means he went out by himself, actually, and not with the caravan of people that would have been traveling together to Jerusalem from Capernaum. Everyone in Israel would be going to the same place at roughly the same time, right? And everyone would travel in groups. That's for safety. Families would travel with other families from their towns and their villages, from wherever they lived, to Jerusalem. And the people from Tiberias would travel together. The people from Magdala would travel together, Bethsaida, Nazareth, Capernaum. All these little caravans and convoys would be descending on Jerusalem or ascending to Jerusalem all at once. And Jesus has decided not to travel in this way. He decided not to go with the caravan from Capernaum. Remember why Jesus hasn't been traveling in Judea, right? Jesus went about Galilee. He would not go into Judea because the Jews are seeking to kill him. And this is real. The powers that be in the Jews, they want to kill him. They're actively trying to find a way to have him done away with. And they know what time of year it is too. And they know that it's Feast of Booths time. And they know that Jesus is supposed to, according to the law of Moses, come to Jerusalem. And they're expecting him, and they're waiting for him, and they're watching for him. No doubt observing all the caravans arriving from Galilee and looking for him as they arrive. Verse 11, the Jews were looking for him at the feast, saying, "Where is he?" So the Jews, the Judeans, the powers that be in Jerusalem know that Jesus should be coming to the feast, so they're looking out for him. This is a pretty strong action word here, actually, this looking. It's not like you ever heard of a bolo, be on the lookout over, or be on the lookout for, whatever. If you happen to see Jesus at the feast, take note. That's not the idea of this word. No, it's more like searching. More often translated seeking, saying, "Where is he?" They're asking around, "Hey, have you seen Jesus?" No doubt strolling around the people arriving from Capernaum asking, "Hey, where's Jesus? Isn't he with you?" And it seems like the Jews, the ones in charge, aren't the only ones in town talking about Jesus either. Verse 12, and there was much muttering about him among the people. The people are all talking about him too. Where is he? What's he going to do? What's going to happen when he shows up? And why does John say the people were muttering and grumbling and complaining is another way to translate that word? Verse 12, and there was much muttering about him among the people, while some said he is a good man, others said no, he is leading the people astray. Seems like everyone has an opinion about Jesus. And it seems like these opinions are pretty strong, actually. Seems like there's some division among the people over the subject of Jesus. Some of the people are of the opinion that Jesus is a good guy. He's on our side. He's doing good things. And some of the people are of the opposite opinion. Jesus is not a good guy. He's a deceiver. He's not on our side. He's doing evil. And the people are divided on the subject of Jesus, and the division is strong, and it's contentious, and it's causing arguments and murmurings. And there's much grumbling and much murmuring and much arguing over the subject of whether Jesus is a good man or a bad man. So much unlike today. Our society would never divide and fight over people's opinions about one man, no matter how orange his hair is. Anyway, everyone's looking for Jesus. Everyone's got an opinion about him. Everyone's murmuring about him. Everyone is wondering where he is. Verse 13, yet for fear of the Jews, no one spoke openly of him. Whenever the authorities are around, everyone's keeping their thoughts and opinions to themselves, apparently. Everyone watches what they're doing when those with the power are around. No one wants to end up in their bad books. Actually, kind of reminds me, I was in Cuba once for a missions trip. We stayed down in Holguin, just in the town with regular church members. And I remember just everybody's like really edgy in Cuba about if anybody ever says anything about the authorities, they're all like shocked. They're afraid of being overheard, afraid of their neighbors ratting them out. Seems like the regime in Jerusalem has instilled a little bit of a similar fear in the people when it comes to this subject of Jesus, and nobody wants to get on their bad side, so when they're around, everybody's shutting up, no matter what they think, whether Jesus is a good guy or a bad guy. Verse 14, but the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and began teaching. Okay, so Jesus has successfully made it to the feast, has successfully arrived in Jerusalem. He's avoided being picked up by the authorities. And the feast is underway, and now he has something to say to everybody. So he goes to the temple and begins to teach. This was a normal thing, actually, for rabbis to do, especially during festivals. Rabbis would go to the crowded temple court. They'd find a spot, and they'd sit down. That was the teaching posture in their time. And they would sit down and begin to teach in hopes of drawing a crowd, gaining more disciples of some kind. Anyway, it seems like there's a certain amount of safety in this very public and crowded setting. The Jews, the authorities, aren't stupid, and they know the word on the street. They know the tension in the people. They know the strong opinions and the divisions over Jesus. And they wouldn't want a big scene. They wouldn't want a big incident. Because why? Because that would attract the Romans' attention. And the Sanhedrin definitely did not want that. When the Romans had to step into Jewish issues, it only undermined the authority of the Jews, of the Sanhedrin, and they would not want that. They don't want to start some kind of riot that attracts the attention of the real powers that be. That's their dilemma. They want to take Jesus into custody, but they do not want to cause the Romans a problem that would require the Romans to get involved. This is actually the same dilemma the Jewish authorities are going to have 6 months from now at the Passover. Matthew 26 says this, "Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and plotted together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said, 'Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people.'" Similar thing here. The Judeans want to arrest Jesus quietly so that they can disappear him. But they're afraid to do it publicly. So when Jesus starts teaching in the crowded temple court during the feast, all they can do is listen to what he's saying. I wonder what they thought about the teaching of Jesus that day. Well, we don't have to wonder. Let's find out. Verse 15. "The Jews, the Judeans, therefore marveled. They were astonished." What did the Jews think of Jesus' teaching? They marveled. Why? Because they were so impacted by the truth of what he was saying? No. Verse 15, "Therefore the Jews marveled, saying, 'How is it that this man has learning when he has never studied?'" That's why they're astounded. That's why they're surprised. They were astounded, they were astonished because, well, as Jesus was talking, they're thinking, how is it that Jesus is talking like this? How is it that Jesus, verse 15, has learning? You might have a footnote there in your Bible. It might say, knows his letters, is the actual literal translation. How is it that Jesus knows his letters? What's that mean? Are they impressed that Jesus knows the alphabet? No. This is a way to refer to the teaching of the rabbis, actually. If a disciple was said to know his letters, it meant he knew the teaching of his rabbi. And these guys are listening to Jesus teach, and they're like, how does this carpenter from Galilee know all this stuff that we teach when he's never studied with us? Meaning, how can he do this? He didn't learn this from us. They're like, this is crazy. How did this Jesus come to know so much if he's never been a part of our thing here in Jerusalem? How does this backwoods rube know so much is the idea. That's why they're marveling at his teaching, not because they liked what he was saying, because how does Jesus teach when the powers that be are around? He points out how wrong they are. How despite all their learning, they don't really know what they're talking about. When the rabbis taught, here's how it went. What they would do would be quote other rabbis and then explain and expound upon what that other rabbi said. They would know their letters and explain them to people. They would be like, Gamaliel wrote this, and this is what he meant. Or Rabbi Hillel, he wrote this, and this is what he meant. And how does Jesus teach? Not like that. Remember the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5? Over and over, Jesus says something like, "You have heard that it was said, but I say to you." Jesus isn't like any other rabbi. He knows more than any other rabbi. And as the Jews are listening to him in the temple court, it seems that they come to realize this too. And they're like, how does Jesus know so much about the scriptures? How does he know his letters so well? Well, Jesus knows what they're thinking. He knows what they're saying. Verse 16, so Jesus answered them. You want to know how? You want to know how I know this so well? You want to know about my teaching? My teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. That's why I sound like this. And they want to know where Jesus gets his teaching because he didn't get it from them, so Jesus tells them, I get my teaching from the one who sent me. This isn't news to them, or at least it shouldn't be. He's already told them this same group of people the answer to this question the last time he had a debate with them. I referenced this already. He's been in Jerusalem before for a big confrontation with these guys. That's when he healed the guy at the pool of Bethesda, where he's like, take up your mat and walk. That was a whole scene that happened on the Sabbath, stirred up trouble. That whole scene happens in John 5:18, says, this is why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. And Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, that the Son does likewise. A little farther down, he says, I can do nothing on my own. I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. We're going to see in the story as we go on, the next chapter, John 8:26, he who sent me is true, and I declare to the world what I have heard from him. John 12, for I have not spoken on my own authority, but the Father who sent me has himself given me a commandment, what to say and what to speak. At the end, when Jesus is praying his high priestly prayer in John 17, he tells his Father, for I have given them the words that you gave me. Anyway, they want to know where Jesus got his teaching, and Jesus is like, I've been telling you all along. My teaching comes from the one who sent me. My teaching comes from my Father. Question, do they know who Jesus is referring to? Of course they do. That's why they're trying to kill him. This is the basis of the ongoing argument between Jesus and the religious authorities. He says that God has sent him, and they say no, the devil has sent you. We just read it in John 5:18. That's why the Jews were seeking more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he's calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. And Jesus calls to the people, has been calling to the people, is calling to the people, listen to me. God has sent me to proclaim the truth. All the while, the scribes and the Pharisees call to the people, don't listen to him. He works for Satan, and he's trying to deceive you. Anyway, back to the story in John 7. Jesus is telling them about his teaching. He says, my teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. And my teaching is astounding to you because it comes from God and not man. That's the idea. Verse 17, if anyone's will is to do God's will, he will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I'm speaking on my own authority. And what's he saying there? Well, anyone whose will is aligned with God's will, anyone whose heart is aligned with God's heart, anyone who wants what God wants will know the truth of my words, Jesus is saying. Verse 18, the one who speaks on his own authority seeks his own glory. But the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and in him there is no falsehood. The one who speaks on his own authority seeks his own glory. What has Jesus just told them? I'm not speaking on my own authority. Therefore, I'm not seeking my own glory. The one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and in him there is no falsehood. Who's that? Who's the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him? He is. Jesus is. Jesus is talking about himself. As he has done before, he's contrasting himself with them. He's like, I'm not here for my own glory. I'm here for the glory of the one who sent me. And anyone else who is in this life for God's glory and not their own will know that I'm speaking the truth. The implication is you guys don't know that. You guys think I'm lying. Therefore, you're all about your own glory, not God's. Therefore, it's you who are the liars, not me. Therefore, it's you who don't know what God wants. It's you who doesn't understand him. You who isn't speaking for him. You're the ones who are the deceivers. You're the ones with the ulterior motives here. Jesus is going to prove his point now. Verse 19, has not Moses given you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. Why do you seek to kill me? They doubt him. They think he's the liar. He's the deceiver. Jesus is like, no. Let me prove this to you. You guys who are so concerned with your law, you guys are all bent out of shape about your traditions, all your hand washings, all your Sabbath keeping. You guys who say you love the law of Moses so much, you are all right now blatantly breaking the law you say is so important to you. Are y'all not right now plotting how to kill me? You hypocrites. You know the 10 Commandments. You know God himself said to Moses, thou shalt not kill, yet you would murder me right now if you could get away with it. What are they going to say to that? What are they going to do? Well, what do criminals always do? They deny. Jesus is like, you guys are trying to have me killed. And they're like, you're crazy. No one's trying to kill you, Jesus. Like they can gaslight Jesus somehow. He knows what they're thinking. Verse 20, the crowd answers, you have a demon. Who's seeking to kill you? Come on, Jesus, get serious. The crowd there in verse 20, referring not to the people in general, but to the crowd of Judeans. The ones that started this argument with him. The idea is they all denied it together, emphatically. Trying to kill you? That's ludicrous, Jesus. That's crazy talk. You must be possessed. No one's trying to kill you. And of course, Jesus knows the truth. They don't believe in him. They don't want what he's offering. They want their religion. They want their traditions. And he's a threat to that. And if they could get away with it, they would kill him. Reality is, by the end of the feast, they're going to try. And this is just the start of the argument that's going to lead to the Judeans. Well, in the end of chapter 8, so they picked up stones to throw at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. Like I said, this is just the beginning of Jesus' visit to Jerusalem and Judea on this, his last Feast of Booths. Feast of Booths, the most celebratory of all the feasts. The last of the fall feasts, the last of the big three, where the people celebrated and thanked God for the harvest and commemorated the days when God provided for them in the wilderness. A feast that looked forward to the day when God himself would live with them on a renewed and redeemed earth. And here is Jesus, the one who has come to do exactly that. The Son of God, Emmanuel, God himself come into this world, come to renew and redeem the earth and everything and everyone in it. And the people he's come to save would rather shut him up than listen to him, would rather kill him than believe in him. Well, they're not going to get their way this time. They will send officers to arrest him, but they won't succeed. Still not his time yet. And they want to kill him. They even pick up stones to do that, but they don't, and Jesus will walk away. But not long from now, 6 months or so, he'll be back in town. And the powers that be will try again to arrest him, and this time they will succeed, and they'll get what they want. And Jesus will be taken into custody, arrested on false accusations from bribed witnesses, and he'll be presented before the people as a candidate for execution. And the people of Jerusalem, led by the Judeans, will scream for his death, calling for the Romans to crucify him, and they'll get their wish. And it will be his time to do what he came to do. And it will be time to do what he's trying to teach his disciples that he's coming to do. On that day, the waiting will be over, and it'll be time for Jesus to die at the hands of the Judeans, hanging on a cross by the side of the road for all to see just outside Jerusalem. And he will. And in doing so, he will prove once and for all that he is the one who speaks the words of God. He is the one in whom there is no falsehood. He is the one who knows God's will, and he is the one who glorifies the Father. He's the perfect Savior. He came to set aside his will and his glory. He came to live a superior life to all other lives, and then to humbly give up that life to his Father for our sake, for his brothers and sisters. He chose to die in our place so that we could live with him forever. He chose to die in the place of the very people who are arguing with him in this story. And some of them, his opponents, will come to believe in him. Don't ever think the story is over for anyone, by the way. The hardest hearts are not a match for the power of the salvation won by our King. He can overcome the hardest of opponents. We're going to see in this story, people are going to respond. People are going to believe, even under the watch and rule of the Judeans. The good news of Jesus will go out and people will believe. His brothers and sisters, his literal ones, they thought he was crazy in the beginning. And now here in our story, they still don't believe him 2 years later. But the story's never over. And half a year from now, when all of that goes down, when Jesus goes back to Jerusalem and is killed and rises from the dead and returns to heaven, when there's just a small group of people waiting in an upper room in Jerusalem as Jesus told them to, 120 people in all, you know who's there counted among them? Then the disciples returned to Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, and with one accord they were devoting themselves to prayer, together with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and his brothers.